you won't want to give it all away. It's yet to be formally launched. But what do you expect? What do you want to happen as part of the National Music Plan?
Well, it was one of the few successes that I can notch up, is to get Darren Henley to have done this report, because I thought he produced a brilliant report, and I think it helped save the funding for music education. I didn't want us to face a situation that we faced the last time budgets were devolved to schools, where money was dissipated, and I think that music is one of those, is part of the curriculum that needs central funding, as in at a local authority level you need a pot of money to make sure it happens. Where I think that the problem has been in music education, if you like, is that there are almost too many players and there's not enough coordination. So I think in any given area there's an enormous amount of resource, orchestras being an obvious example, but many other charities and organisations that can make a difference. And I think central to the National Music Plan will be what Darren Henley recommended, which is what he calls music education hubs, which is to take the local authority model of funding music education, but to extend it out and to allow other people to participate in that model, be it an orchestra or a music venue to participate in providing music education, and potentially to become the provider and to bid for that money in order to provide it, potentially to allow different local authority areas to provide, which are really dynamic and go ahead and successful, to potentially come in and provide music education in other local authority areas. So really it's to open up provision with an element of core government funding to bring in more partners and to make a more coherent whole.
When you say an element of public funding, what are the other elements of funding? Is this going to be, is philanthropy part of that?
I think philanthropy could very well be part of it. I think if the model is open and accessible. I mean, the elements of public funding would obviously be the core music grant that comes from the Department of Education, but clearly publicly funded organisations such as subsidised orchestras or subsidised music venues could also potentially contribute to that and contribute money to that. But I certainly think if there were philanthropists or businesses that wanted to support that model, I think that would be a very good thing.
Is there not a little bit too little philanthropy to go around all the hungry mouths that are expecting to be fed by it? Because on the one hand, you're expecting philanthropy to fill gaps in core arts provision. Now you're suggesting that philanthropy ought to help education, which of course traditionally has been more or less provided by the state.
Well, the model isn't designed to, isn't predicated on getting private money or philanthropy money in. But I think there's a lot out there, particularly in music. And one of my lines has always been that, you know, if I had £1 for every music charity that I met, I'd probably be rich enough to start my own music charity. And there are lots of organisations, just looking across the range in London, of organisations that do provide support for music education, particularly in primary schools. And I think the real challenge is to coordinate what people are doing, which sounds very kind of centrist. It's not meant to. It's meant to be an enabling model where the bidding process allows people to come together to put together a coherent bid that will make the public money that's available and potentially philanthropic money go much further in terms of providing children with what I hope will be a core music education offer, which would be the chance to learn a musical instrument. Not everyone is going to carry on, like me, I didn't carry on, will carry on learning a musical instrument, but to give them that opportunity, to give them the opportunity to be educated about music, and to give them the chance to sing as well.
Thank you, Ed. Just before I move to my next question, I should say, of course, that we will open this discussion up in due course, so please, you know, be aware of that and fashion your questions, and we'll try and get as many in. In relation to music, Ed, I don't think your own personal commitment to music education is in doubt. You've clearly made something of that since you were in opposition. But you know, how far do your tentacles reach? I mean, why isn't music and arts part of the English Baccalaureate? And what is the position on music being part of the national curriculum? That was an absolutely central part of Darren Henley's recommendations. And we've seen no sign and no commitment that that is going to be part of the national curriculum.
Well, there are kind of two strands to that question. First of all, I think Michael Gove is right and wants to, as it were, have a core curriculum offer, which is the EBAC, to make sure that the basics are taught at primary level and secondary level. There's a national curriculum review going on. I don't know what the outcome of that review is going to be. I think it was good that Darren, as an independent reviewer, made it clear that he thought that music should be a central part of the curriculum. I think that the fact that the music education plan got off the ground, that we got buy-in from the Department of Education to make it happen, and that we secured the funding from the Department of Education shows a commitment. I think Michael Gove is committed to music in the sense that he understands it's important in its own right, but he also understands that schools that do music well tend to be schools that also do very well in terms of the academic curriculum. So I can't, to use that terrible stock politician's phrase, I can't preempt what the National Curriculum Review is going to say. But I think regardless of whether or not it's a core part of the national curriculum, I absolutely hear what you say about that. I think the music plan and the funding and the commitment to make the music plan happen, I think is a good thing.
The government thinks that the creative industries are an important part of the economy, do they not?
Yes.
Why then has the government ceased to subsidise arts and humanities tuition in universities?
Well, there's a lot of what the government has done is simply said that universities are allowed to charge up to a certain amount in tuition fees, and arts and humanities courses tend not to be as expensive as science, engineering, medicine courses. So it's not a question of not subsidising those courses. It's simply that the fees tend to cover the fees for arts and humanities courses in a way that they don't necessarily cover the fees for science and engineering and medical courses.
Is there not the fact is that David Willits only the other week said that he regarded dance as a sort of second tier A-level that shouldn't be regarded as a valuable A-level for people going into university. And it seems actually at core, despite your own best efforts, Ed, that it's rather a Philistine government who does not recognise the value of arts to the wider society.
Well, I think David Willits is married to an artist. So I think he probably understands the value of the arts. I was surprised by his comment. I don't necessarily think that government should tell people, particularly if we're trying to make more of a connection between what you choose to study and the fact that you're going to have to make some investment to make that happen. I think it should be up to individuals to decide on what course is appropriate for them. I happen to be a strong supporter of dance, both as a subject at secondary school, but also as a subject in university. I think it takes, any dancer or anyone who studies dance, it takes exactly the same kind of discipline that it takes to study any other arts and humanities subject. And I think people who think that people who are studying dance are simply wafting around a room are slightly misguided.
So David's slightly misguided.
Well, I think that if I'm not sure that he thinks that people waft around a room when they study dance, but I certainly think that dance is a valued subject to be studied at university.
Do you not think there's a danger of creativity being choked off at the root through these reforms to universities? I mean, this is an absolutely hugely important part of the arts ecology, if you like. The fees are increasing, even humanities fees, which one might have imagined to be cheaper than science fees because they're cheaper courses to provide, are very expensive. This is a huge issue for people going into conservatories as well as into universities. I mean, this is a disaster for the future of the arts, isn't it? It's just choking off talent at the root.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, first of all, I don't think people who study arts and humanities subjects necessarily always go into the arts. Some of them become bankers, for example, and therefore go into the unproductive part of the economy as opposed to the arts, which is the productive sector of the economy. But I think that the whole tuition fees policy issue is a much bigger deal than and a separate subject, which is about how you change the way that universities are financed and whether or not you can continue to have the expansion of higher education that we've seen on the basis of free education in the sense of low or non-existent tuition fees. And it is about university, I think it will take a while for the model to settle down, but it will be about universities offering a different range of courses, different models of courses, more flexible and different courses in in the light of that. And I think there will also be potentially a change of emphasis. I think there might be, and I would welcome it, frankly, more emphasis on apprenticeships and different forms of education. But that's a big debate about the future of higher education. I think that we are a creative nation. I think that we are a nation that takes the creative industries seriously. I think that in all forms, people people recognise there's the potential for a career in the arts if you're studying the arts and the humanities, but there's also a potential for a career in other creative industries. When we commissioned the report into skills for the video games industry, one of the main recommendations there was that it was just as important for them to have arts graduates as it was to have computer science or physics graduates. So those are important links to make, and I think students will make those decisions on the basis of, first of all, being passionate about wanting to study a particular subject, and also I think they should realise that studying an arts and humanities subject will be just as relevant to many future careers that they could choose as studying science and maths. I don't think there's an attempt to kind of socially engineer people away from the arts and humanities, and I don't think it will be a disaster for the arts and humanities. I think your point about the conservatoires is a very important point. They're obviously subject to hefty specialist funding, and I certainly have engaged with David Willits over the last few months to make sure that we are aware of any unintended consequences that might affect the conservatoires. I think that kind of elite arts education, we need to make sure that we secure it, and I engage with HEFCE, but it is very much a matter for HEFCE to take that forward. But I've certainly let them know that I think it's an issue that we must make sure that we focus on so that nothing untoward happens.
Another question about the wider ecology of the arts. What steps have you taken to protect arts organisations from local authority funding cuts? This is a very, as we all know, some councils are brilliant, like Manchester. Some councils are making easy cuts in relation to the arts, and this is seeing a withering of local arts provision, which is so important, particularly people growing up in their local area and being able to go to the museum, go to the local theatre and see quality stuff. What is your relationship with Eric Pickles?
That's a very leading question.
Everyone always makes jokes about poor old Eric Pickles. Well, I don't know about poor old Eric Pickles, but I know you wrote to local authorities in February saying please don't cut library funding, try and do A, B or C, but you have no power over that, do you?
No, I don't have any power. It's a very fair point, and I think there's also a kind of philosophical point as well, which is, we are a government that believes in localism and allowing councils the space to make the decisions that they have to make on the ground. They are the democratically elected councillors, and I think to a certain extent in terms of local authority provision, the buck stops with them. I think there is, I'm absolutely...
But isn't it your responsibility?
I'm fully aware of the kind of combination of central government austerity and local authority austerity. Within what we're able to do as a government, obviously there's the Arts Council funding local organisations through its own grant and aid, plus the increase in lottery, which, for example, means significant funds available for grants for the arts, which are one-off grants of now £100,000 to fund arts programmes. So there are opportunities there. And obviously Renaissance. And I think the other point to make is it's not necessarily a one-off, it's not necessarily a crisis in terms of public spending. If you remember that Renaissance for museums was set up by Chris Smith precisely because a particular museum faced a funding crisis because its local authority was walking away. So government is now still involved in funding effectively local authority museums thanks to that programme, which we've maintained because we think it's important, and we think there should be a partnership between the Arts Council, which of course is now responsible for Renaissance as well, which I think is, to a certain extent signals a quality control to say, we believe in this organisation, and that should encourage local authorities to co-invest with it. But I think there's another kind of important point to make, which I think is kind of the philosophical point, which is when you get a situation like this, you get said, what are you, the minister, going to do? How are you going to step in and solve this? And to a certain extent, part of me wants to say, well, what are you going to do to help yourself? If you are an arts organisation that's in a position that the local authority is cutting your grant, it may well be because it's seen as the easy slice off the top. It may well be because, in your view, your local councillors are Philistines, but it may also be because they haven't spent time over the last few years, frankly, cultivating their local council, showing them what they're doing in the community and why they're open. And then that is how councillors think. You know, they've got to manage a care budget, they've got to manage a transport budget, they've got all sorts of budgets they've got to manage and make effective. And if you're going to be getting money from your local council, you've got to show them why you deserve that money.
Who are these supine arts organisations who have not been cultivating their local council? Who are these sort of dead-in-the-water arts organisations who aren't every single day doing the best they can with incredibly limited resources?
Well, I'm not going to name names. I mean, there are some that I've visited that you slightly feel, why are you getting local authority funding? I'm saying that if you are in a position where the local authority is cutting your budget, I think there is, you know, I've made the point about central government funds being available in partnership, but I do think that one should ask oneself the question, have you done enough to engage with your local council to show them why you're relevant and why you deserve a grant?
It's a bit late now, isn't it? It's a little bit late now.
Absolutely, yeah, but I'm making that philosophical point.
Isn't it the responsibility of the government to take a holistic view over the importance of culture to our society, which involves not choking it off at various different points out with the DCMS's responsibility? Or even
well, it's a slightly leading question. I mean, what is government's role? Government's role is, you know, through the Arts Council to provide funding for arts organisations, and through the Arts Council, 600 to 700 arts organisations receive funding. But in terms of kind of an overall survey of the voluntary arts, you could say there are 50,000 arts organisations in this country. And I think the other role in terms of working with the Arts Council is to provide a development agency for the arts, if you like, an organisation that can take the overview that you want and talk about what's good practice. But the arts are a living ecology, and you don't want the arts to be set in aspic. And I frankly don't agree that if for example, you are getting a grant at the moment, that is your future secure for the next 10, 20, 30 years. I don't think the arts should stagnate or be complacent. These are very tough times. There are businesses going under all the time in an economy. And that's my phone. Probably somebody telling me to shut up, but or ringing in from Nottingham or Tyneside. But so that's what government's role is. But you know, money is tight at the moment. That is a fact. Does
Eric Pickles get the arts? I mean, this is a really, this is a really important point.
No,
I mean,
well, yes, it is. Okay, carry on. Sorry.
It's a really important point about, you know, senior ministers and other capacities taking an interest or having a kind of, you know, you can talk all you like about creative interests and it's terribly important and people's lives and da-da-da, but it seems to me, at least, that Eric Pickles does not have any interest in preserving or in encouraging this part of British life or the economy.
Well, I haven't talked to Eric Pickles about the arts. He's coming to my constituency in October.
Why not? Why have you not spoken to Eric Pickles about the arts?
About his interest in the arts, his personal interest in the arts, which is the question you asked me. And
again,
I find it odd that there is this kind of, you know, you're judged in terms of your ministerial performance on whether or not you know, how much you talk about the arts. I mean, I think it's important that we celebrate the arts and highlight the arts. But what we're talking about is how we distribute.
The question was about policy, not about personality.
How we distribute a finite budget. Well, the arts are not a statutory provision. I mean, Eric's department is there to allocate money to local authorities, which he has done.
Do you think there should be a statutory provision? Do you think there should be a local authority?
No, I don't think there should be a statutory provision.
Okay, let's move on from that. This is the year of corporate philanthropy, which Jeremy announced in December last year, Jeremy Hunt, the Culture Secretary. What precisely has the year of corporate philanthropy achieved so far?
Well, it's achieved quite a lot. It's achieved, for example, the £100 million Catalyst Fund that's been announced by...
But that's public money, that's not to do with corporate
well, that was
money.
Announced by the Arts Council and Heritage Lottery Fund, and it's designed to lever in corporate money. So it's designed, that's why it's called the Catalyst Fund. It's designed to allow arts and heritage organisations to say to potential donors, if you give us money, It can be match funded or part match funded by government, so that's why it's going to, we hope, act as a catalyst to lever in corporate philanthropy. So I think that's a very good, tangible achievement of the year of corporate philanthropy. And also within that as well is funding for capacity building. So again, to allow arts organisations and heritage organisations to get grants from the Arts Council and Heritage Lottery Fund to create the capacity to raise money. There's been the inheritance tax break, which is designed to encourage people to leave money to arts organisations. And there's also the commitment to allow the lifetime giving of works of art to institutions, as opposed to, again, giving through an estate.
So what companies or corporations or businesses have given as a result of the year of corporate philanthropy 2011?
Well, I think that what I think is encouraging is that the overall level of corporate giving, as far as I'm aware, is pretty much maintained despite the difficult economic climate. I mean, I think that, again, it's incumbent on arts organisations to get out there and engage with businesses. And I think there are points you can make about that. First of all, I think that there are a lot of arts organisations that there's a danger sometimes that some arts organisations think that the conversation with the donor ends when they write the cheque. I think that's when the conversation, is actually just starting to begin. I think that a lot of organisations need to understand that it's not just a question of hiring a fundraiser and the money rolls in. The entire organisation has to be engaged in fundraising. I think people have to understand that the people they are hoping will give them money should be seen as partners, not donors, that they're people who are giving them money because they share the vision of that arts organisation, and they should be let in that sense and become part of the organisation. So I think those are all...
Is it always a good thing for donors to become part of the organisation?
I do. I think it's a very good thing to include donors. I mean, I think...
Is there not a danger that, as in certain cases in America, donors can be too powerful, be too strong stakeholders in organisations and cause artistic policy to change as a result, not necessarily beneficially?
Well, I think that's a subjective view, isn't it? So I wouldn't say that was a danger, no.
Okay. But you can't point to any specific achievements of the year of corporate philanthropy in terms of donations from or sponsorship deals from corporate organisations?
No, I can't. The other point I was going to make was that, again, it's a non-stop process. I mean, one of the things that I was reading the Sunday papers last week, where the profiles of, or a few weeks ago, the profile of two business people who mentioned their particular interest in particular art forms. And I texted a couple of arts organisations, say, did you know that X is interested in Y? And they didn't know that. That's not a criticism of them, but I think it's one of those things where you can make these random connections. I remember talking to one art gallery whose principal donor came about because she came in to use the loo, and because people were nice to her, had started a conversation with her and took her behind the scenes. She ended up, a few months later, becoming one of their biggest donors. So,
where was that?
I'm not going to tell you, because obviously I haven't been given permission to reveal who that was, but I think it's an interesting anecdote about you can stumble across people who will become your biggest supporters by accident, and you should always be on the lookout for them. You bump into them in the street.
Is there not a problem in the fact that, as we've discussed, arts funding has been cut, local authority funding is being cut, and fundraising, as Jeremy Hunt has said on many occasions, is a long-term capacity building project. It could take 100 years for somewhere like the Cornerhouse to establish an endowment that would keep it going. What about organisations that need to make it through to next month?
Well, we could go around in circles with this. We are where we are. When we came into office, it was quite clear that there were going to be significant reductions in funding. To get party political about it, it was also clear whoever won the election, that was going to be the case. And we fought a battle with the Treasury, and the Treasury has its own agenda, and as an arts minister and a culture secretary, you have your own agenda. And we kept, you know the mantra, Charlotte. Probably quite a lot of people in this room know the mantra about what we say about what we feel we achieved in terms of arts funding. We achieved a 15% reduction in grant and aid for the Arts Council and a 15% reduction in Renaissance. And people don't like me saying that's an achievement, but I think it is an achievement. And we also increased the lottery substantially so that it's effectively going up from 200 million to 300 million for heritage and the same for the arts. So I think those are substantial achievements. We are where we are in terms of funding. And I think that in terms of what the Arts Council has achieved within that, I think it's been a staggering achievement. I think that Alan Davey is a formidable chief executive. And I think the funding round that he undertook in those tight circumstances was well received. And I think the reason it was well received was because people felt, first of all, that it had been a very open and transparent process about how people went about it. And I think they also felt that the decisions were made on merit. And they weren't simply just taking a scythe and chopping off the top and seeing what happened. They felt it was strategic investment decisions were being made. So that's where we are, and we can spend a lot of time saying, don't cut the arts, you shouldn't have cut the arts. That's fair enough. Do
you think you've damaged the arts by cutting the arts?
Well, I don't.
I mean, again, misquoting
it's a very difficult. It's a frustrating debate, this. I mean, I went to the Museums Association yesterday, and my speech was an optimistic speech, and it was an optimistic speech for two reasons. One is, I'm the arts minister, so I'm not going to go there and say it's a nightmare. But it was also an optimistic speech because actually I felt I had quite a lot of material when I listed the kind of new museums and galleries that have opened in the last 12 months. And I didn't want to come across as complacent because when I'd listed them, I said, are we at the peak and it's all going to go downhill from here? But there is, as I say, lots of lottery funding. But it's important, as you've seen in Spain, where they've opened the new, as it were, the new Bilbao, and they've had to close it 4 months later. So it's important that these projects are sustainable and thought through in those terms. So I don't feel I'm living in a country where the arts are in decline. I feel that I'm living in a country where the arts are thriving. In fact, I was reading The Observer this weekend and going through the review section. I thought, Christ, you need about 18 different lives to even touch the stuff, the excellent stuff that is being reviewed in this Sunday's edition of The Observer. So that's what I feel. If you tell me I'm wrong, you can. But I suppose what I'm saying is that what was frustrating about the Museums Association was, of course, the speech by the head of the Museums Association was, it's all cuts, it's all decline, you should get out more, Ed Vaizey, you don't know what's going on, they're all going to hell in a handbasket. Well, a museum has closed in Norfolk. Now, that museum in King's Lynn got 8,000 visitors a year. Now, we can debate whether that is the decimation of the museum sector or not. I personally don't think it is. I think there will be tough decisions that people have to take. People will have to think much harder about what they're doing and what they can achieve. I'm not saying it's easy, but I certainly don't sign up to this image that the arts are in crisis and decline in this country.
That's a good moment to open it up to the floor, I think. There's a question at the back, Mark Pemberton. You do not need to wait for a microphone, you just need to speak clearly if you could and say who you are. But also questions only, please, friends, not lengthy political speeches, because there'll be lots of questions that I'm sure all want to hear from Ed on.
Mark Pemberton, the Association of British Orchestras. One tiny comment. The problem with corporate philanthropy is, as Arts and Business pointed out when you launched it, it's a transactional relationship, a sponsorship arrangement based around marketing and branding imperatives, which is why corporate philanthropy is a contradiction in terms, which is why the incentives were all individual giving incentives, because that's where philanthropy really resides. My question is, in terms of the cuts where the damage was minimised to frontline arts through putting a sizable cut in the Arts Council itself. I remember getting a phone call from you, Ed, describing this, around trying to help create a lighter touch so that arts organisations were less worried about bureaucracy and more concentrating on delivery of great art on the front line. Are you aware of the Arts Council's decision to develop a system of KPIs on their national portfolio organisations And has that come from the DCMS, or is that entirely a decision of the Arts Council itself?
I wasn't aware, I probably should have been. Me not being aware, by the way, is not...
It's the arm's length principle, isn't it?
It's not an indication of the importance of the subject. It could just be messing up. But I mean, there are KPIs for the national museums. They don't appear too onerous. I think the Arts Council is entitled, with its, given that it's investing public money, to obviously for the organisations who get that money to be accountable. And I think Alan Davey and others are very aware. I mean, they're not deaf, and they absolutely know that one of the chief complaints from organisations that get money from the Arts Council is the level of bureaucracy. But I mean, you can put it in context. I had an extraordinary story yesterday when I was in Brighton, talking to digital businesses who were explaining how difficult it is to procure, get a procurement contract with central government. And one of the questions, I shouldn't laugh, one of the questions this small digital business in Brighton was asked was, are there any cases pending against you at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague? So I think at every level of government, a lighter touch is probably needed.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Conley. I'm the director of Castlefield Gallery here in Manchester. We are an art gallery with agency. Castlefield Gallery is very interested in talent development and supporting emerging artists outside of formal education, sometimes working with those institutions though. What roles do you think organisations such as us can play within the government's plans for talent development, especially with young people?
So I missed the first part of what you were saying, what you did.
Oh, I see. We're an art gallery, a contemporary art gallery with agency. So, excuse me. So we work with emerging talent to try to feed them through the larger institutions to kind of break them through, particularly with Northwest artists, I guess. Yeah.
Are you a profit or a commercial gallery or not-for-profit?
We are an RFO at the moment with Arts Council, so we're not-for-profit, and we've been going for about 27 years. But it's about finding a way forward so that we can continue to develop talent, particularly within the Northwest, in a national context. I'm just wondering what kind of schemes or government plans there are to kind of support the developmental side of the arts ecology, because I think that's the area that's been lacking or has been cut from next year's funding. And I think the local authorities too may find it difficult to support that layer as well.
Well, in terms of developing artist talent, I mean, I think, again, I think grants for the arts, I mean, if Alan Davis was here, I'm sure he'd say that grants for the arts is an opportunity because it makes awards to individuals in terms of developing talent. And again, in terms of funding organisations like yourself, I'm sure the Arts Council will regard the development talent, organisations that develop talent as being an important part of their portfolio. So I think in those terms, that's I think what the answer to your question would be. But I mean, by all means, get in touch with me if you think that part of kind of developing talent is being neglected.
Fran Toms, Head of Culture for Manchester City Council, I'd like to just thank you for the compliment about Manchester's approach to cuts to culture. But I would like to just stress that it's taken a long, long time, and it's very much in partnership with cultural organisations in the city. We are one cultural ecology, and I think that is very important. That's why I do agree with you, Ed, that it's up to us to work together to make those arguments. We've spent probably 15, 20 years making those arguments about culture and the value of culture within the council, across every department, from health to education, children, young people, and we've had some success. I'd like to know whether you'd like some help with doing the same thing with DCMS to improve the clout of DCMS as a government department.
Yes, that'd be great. Terrific. No, I think it's a huge issue how government works, and it's been a revelation to me as a minister that the yes minister cliche is true. And we have at the Tory conference, I'm sure this is a gift to the Guardian, but
it's all right, my tape recorder's not working.
We have a business breakfast where businesses come and are able to talk to ministers. And I was looking around the room, because you get kind of different range of businesses every 15 minutes. And I could see several ministers, and I thought I'd really like to have 15 minutes with that minister to produce, to press my own particular agenda where his or her department is relevant. I think there should be kind of speed dating sessions for ministers so that we get a chance, because it is amazing how little you see of your colleagues because you're in your department. And I do think we need to find a way in Whitehall for departments to work much more effectively together. And I take, the point implied in your question, which is, it's incumbent on me and other ministers to think, you have to set aside a part of your job description is to get out there and press your case with other departments. And DCMS obviously is more prominent in that regard, because a lot of your agenda depends on other departments, be it education, communities, local government, and so on.
So good, masterclass from Manchester Council, we all approve. There was a gentleman who's had his hand up for some time. Yes, you. Yeah.
Hi, Greg Hutchins from Legacy Trust UK. We support cultural programmes inspired by London 2012, including the Cornerhouse and the Rolling Abandoned Mobile Devices. Bearing in mind that a national celebration of culture was one of the pillars of the bid, subsequently we had the Cultural Olympiad, for good or bad, whether people think about what's been achieved through that. Will you and your team be looking back over that national celebration of culture and seeing what really were the successes, and perhaps giving some thought to how that can be sustained in a true celebration of culture nationally in the future?
Yes, I mean, I think the Cultural Olympiad is going to be fantastic. I think that Ruth Mackenzie has made a brilliant job of taking it forward and providing some real coherence for it. And I think in terms of potentially, learning the lessons and a future model for further cultural celebrations, I think that would be something that we'd naturally want to do. I mean, to a certain extent, I wish there had been more focus on it from a much earlier stage, and I think to have got somebody in harness at an earlier stage of the Cultural Olympiad would have made it even more effective. But I think what Ruth is going to produce is going to be terrific.
Minister John Summers from the Halle. I don't think anybody here doubts your commitment to what you're trying to achieve, but I wonder if you could give some idea of what you think success would look like in 3 or 4 years' time in terms of the arts in this country.
Well, I think success will be sustainability, if I can use that, what is a slight jargon word. I think that what is emerging from what we're doing is, I think there'll be, a strong arts council across the piece, covering a wider cultural terrain than it has before. I think the philanthropy agenda is very important. I think we do, to put it bluntly, I think we do need to raise our game in terms of philanthropy and fundraising in order for arts organisations to become more sustainable. And again, the mantra, it's not as a substitute for government funding. And I think, my other passion, as some of you know, is technology and the huge opportunities I think that technology provides for arts organisations in transforming the way they engage with audiences. So I think that for me, success would be excellent arts organisations who have been put on a genuinely sustainable footing. And the other S word I use is silos, because again, I think that part of the achievement of putting museums and libraries in with the Arts Council, but also the way that the Arts Council is now working with Nesta, and also this much greater awareness of which has been present in Manchester for many years, of the ecology that covers culture and the creative industries, is very important. So I hope that over the next 3 or 4 years there'll be many more random conversations between orchestras and video games designers, for example.
I'd like to bring in Isabel, Nottingham and Tyneside. Thank you very much for contributing. How many have you got?
I'll try to bundle them in the theme. I've got one from Rachel in Nottingham who's asking, Ed, if you can give us an idea on how much money Creative England will have to invest when the fund is launched on the 17th. Do you want me to?
John Newbigin is sitting behind me, so he can answer that question.
And obviously he's going to ask the woman sitting next to him to actually know the answer. It will be just shy of £1 million for the remainder of this financial year.
There's a couple of questions that are picking up on what you were talking about on the subject of putting the arts to the government, the funding body, the council. So Claire is asking, how can participatory art make their work more visible to the DCMS and ACE to prevent them being constantly overlooked? And this is linked to also a question about how can rural and regional body build the necessary contacts to consider relying on philanthropic support. I suppose this was linked to a tweet from Phil, who was asking if you have any plans to release a policy document entitled How to Bump into Philanthropists in the Street.
I think that's a great title for a policy document. It would certainly be eye-catching, and I think that, again, if I can be slightly sensitive, I think there's a slightly negative tone to those tweets, and I think, again, I would change that to a positive and say, frankly, if you don't realise that you could bump into a philanthropist in the street, then you haven't quite got the point I'm trying to make, which is that you should always be on. You know, if you're running an arts organisation, you should always be thinking, who can I engage with my arts organisation who might want to fund the projects I'm doing? And if that means bumping into somebody in the street or meeting them at an event, then that's what you should be thinking.
It kind of depends where you live, though. I mean, you know, you're quite like if you
well,
you're in Mayfair, it's kind of quite likely that you'll bump into rich people. If you're in Middlesbrough or Stoke-on-Trent, a little bit less so, isn't it? I mean, this is a very uneven
this is the other, I
field.
think, fundamental misconception about what philanthropy is. I mean, if you talk to Michael Kaiser, who I think who I regard as an impressive man in terms of how he approaches fundraising, who used to run the Royal Opera House, now runs the Kennedy Centre. His point is, you know, the people you should be targeting are, you know, for want of a better phrase, the middle classes, people who are prepared to give you £100 or £500 a year to support your organisation. So, again, I think it's a huge misconception. If you think that fundraising is about getting a 5, 6 or 7-figure cheque out of people, then again, I don't think you've quite understood what the agenda is.
Even paying £100 or £500.
Well, I knew you were going to say that, obviously.
Yeah, well, if you knew I was going to say it,
but the point, your point, Charlotte, is that you can only find a philanthropist coming out of a hedge fund office in Mayfair. My point is you can find people who are prepared to give your organisation and support your organisation money.
My point wasn't that. It's that it's easy. You know, if you're in a really tough area, it is harder. It's harder to find people who've even got £100 to spare. You must.
And
it's a very uneven playing field. You know, you're kind of, on the one hand, castigating for people not being open to the possibility that a philanthropist might walk in through the door.
I'm not castigating people. I'm saying that we need to raise this fundraising agenda. Of course, there are areas where it's more difficult to raise money, and there are areas where it's more difficult to get audiences. But you know, Middlesbrough has a fantastic arts ecology. All parts of this country have a fantastic arts ecology, and I think there's a very kind of defeatist tone coming out of you about how saying that there are certain parts of the country where it's simply not going to work. I just don't agree with that.
Any more questions before we beat each other up?
Lots of questions.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nick Hunt. I'm director at Macmillan Arts, working in Lancashire, in some of the poorest towns in the country. The other major loss to the arts this year that's been slightly less reported has been the abolition of the regional development agencies and the kind of strategic overview they had, and like them or loathe them, some very enlightened decisions about what to invest in. A lot of money came from Northwest Development Agency into Manchester International Festival, Liverpool Biennial, and Lakes Alive, and so on. And a lot of the shift in funding from the Arts Council this year has been to plug the kind of black hole that's been left by that strategic investment. So what's left there is the Regional Growth Fund and the new local enterprise partnerships, which are private sector led. There's a lot less money, so their decisions are a lot more conservative. So how do we get that kind of strategic investment to pay attention to culture as a driver of the economy and make those enlightened decisions?
Well, I think I've always encouraged arts organisations to apply to the Regional Growth Fund. I don't have no say on how the money is allocated, but I've certainly wanted to let people know that, as far as I'm concerned, an arts organisation has as much right as a widget factory or whatever to apply to the Regional Growth Fund for funding, particularly as it's meant to support the more deprived areas of the country and support organisations that create sustainable jobs, which is what arts organisations are perfectly capable of doing. And I think there are, again, many local economic partnerships who put culture very much front and centre of what they do. And I think Manchester, the point made about Manchester is again another valuable point, which is, don't wait for the next crisis, as it were. If there is a local economic partnership, ask yourself, have you engaged with it? Are you talking to them? Are you letting them know how you can fit in with their agenda and how they can fit in with yours?
There's a bunch of questions, and I'm going to take 3 at once. Did you want to?
I wanted to, Stella Hall, Festival Director, Preston Guild 2012, which only comes every 20 years, so what a great moment next year is going to be when we all come back to ours. Yes, we lost out from the Regional Development Agency, but we're still trying to work in partnership. Enough preamble. Secretaries of State for Culture, Ministers for Culture, notoriously short-lived because it's a wonderful opportunity and then they move on to something else, a different portfolio. So in order to ensure that your successors have as much passion and interest as yourself in the field, perhaps it's about building on the offer from Manchester in terms of education of those other departments, those other ministers and would-be ministers, and perhaps there are people in this room and elsewhere who would join that task force to be part of that education about investment in the arts as a cultural driver, as a contributor to health and well-being, and to build on that wonderful investment that's been made in the Cultural Olympiad, which really demonstrates how creative the arts sector is in this country, so different from every other Olympic organisation to now. So joining together, being part of that thing, it's an offer.
Just crack through.
Stephen Snoddy from the New York Gallery Walsall. I live in Manchester, been here 20 years, so it's one of the reasons why I'm here today. Philanthropy, just to give you an example, the New York Gallery Walsall is a local authority museum. It's also part of the NPO. If I walk down Walsall High Street, which this morning was very pleasant indeed, and I bump into a philanthropist who grew up with the Garman Ryan collection and decides to give the New York Gallery £50,000, that would be fantastic, except that a year ago, the Director of Finance of Walsall Council, which is Conservative-led, sent a directive out that if you overachieved on your income targets, they would take the surplus back into the centre. Now, you try and explain to me where the incentive is for me to go out and raise money when the centre will take it back.
Okay, so we've got procurement, Stephen on overachieving and joining together stuff.
What was it? Joining together with
Preston
Guild.
Sorry,
joining together stuff.
Shorthand.
Well, I think it's very important to join things together. And in fact, if I can put back the question, retrieve the point that was made earlier about the need, the way that culture was pushed up the agenda in Manchester. I don't think necessarily Manchester should come and give me a masterclass. They should also give a masterclass to other local authorities. And I think that the local government group, there are numerous organisations that bring local authorities together to discuss best practice. And I think it would be good to see local authority organisations taking the lead in showing other local authorities what they can achieve by taking culture seriously. Perhaps they could start with Walsall. So I don't have an answer to your question. I don't know the facts. The get-out clause for a politician is the politician's clause. Get-out clause is I don't know the specific details of the case to which you the case to which you refer. So
you want me to send you the email? I'll tell you what, Ed. I'll send you the email.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
I'll do that.
If you send me the email, then I could engage with you on that point. And I think on John Newbegin's very important point about the creative industries having access to government contracts. I mean, this was a creative industry I was talking to in Brighton and a digital agency, and I said to them, send me the form, this 70-page form that you had to fit out. There are 2 centres of influence here. There's the Small Business Minister in Biz, Mark Prisk, but there's also Francis Maud, who, in theory, was literally kind of negotiating with Vodafone about the size of the government mobile phone bill. So in terms of getting government procurement, getting small businesses to procure services for government, he is also a very important part of that conversation.
We've got 2 minutes. I'm going to take one question. I'm afraid it's the guy in the front row. I'm sorry, because I saw him first. I'm sure Ed will be only too pleased to answer questions by email, won't you?
Yes, absolutely.
And Stephen, if you could forward that email to me too.
Yeah, I will do.
Shoot.
I was just wondering how you feel the government's doing grappling its own tendencies towards centralisation. So I'm Drew Hemmond from Future Everything Additional Culture Festival and Imagination Lancaster at Lancaster University. Taking, for example, Tech City, does the government intend to support that level of investment that only benefits 200 companies with the same postcode? Would you encourage Tech City to represent innovation across the UK, or does the government intend to support major clusters of startups elsewhere in the UK, for example, Manchester?
Tech City doesn't involve government money per se, it involves government heft in terms of highlighting the opportunities in Tech City. I think that Tech City is good for the whole country in the sense that certainly a lot of the inward investors who have talked to us about Tech City say it gives Britain an image of a country that is interested in the high-tech economy, and that is encouraging to us, which is why we want to come and invest here. And companies that might be attracted by the Tech City model may end up investing in other parts of the country. I think that certainly in terms of, obviously the Chancellor's announced enterprise zones, which are designed to encourage clusters around the country in particular areas. I mean, I've got one in my constituency, but that's very much science and research focused. I certainly do think that the government should take the lessons from Tech City and roll them out. I think they should use Tech City potentially as a test bed, and I think one of the successes of Tech City should be that they can take any lessons learned. As a small example, the fact that a lot of startup companies want access at a very early stage, particularly in the digital area, to legal advice as well as investment advice, and this idea that there could be when you're talking about a high-tech company, you're always talking about that first stage investment by an investor, but you're never talking about the kind of first stage technical advice that you need to start a small business. So there are lessons to be learned from Tech City, which I hope the government will communicate around the country.
Well, according to this very elegant watch, which I must not steal by mistake, our time is up. And I would like to thank you all very much for being here and for asking such great questions. I would like to thank the Minister for being here and for being so game. It's been a pleasure, despite our nearly falling out.